Welcome to another episode of Dungeons and Social Distancing with Nerdarchy.
Join us as we discussed how Dungeon Masters can be the best and worst D&D players. Welcome to Nerdarchy. I'm Nerdarchy Steve, and as usual, I'm hanging out with this nerd.
Nerdarchy Ted.
Hit that subscribe button if you want to see player and DM advice for D&D.
And if you attune to that notification bell, you'll guarantee you don't miss a single Nerdarchy video.
Hey, maybe you haven't seen one of our videos in a while, or even, you haven't caught one of our recent ones, but you may notice that we're doing things a little bit differently. We are trying to practice social distancing and keep everyone safe. My wife is autoimmune compromised, also happens to be Ted's sister. So we are following best practices, therefore we are recording things virtually. But once all this nonsense blows over, we'll be back to our normal way of recording videos. With that, we're going to jump into this one. And as usual, yes, we have a sponsor, Dungeon Fog. It's an amazing piece of software that lets you create maps. When I use it, I love it because it just makes me feel like when I was a kid drawing on graph paper. I don't know why, it just has that feel to it to me, except for it makes it way prettier and way more useful than I could have ever did. You can put notes on it, all kinds of cool things, but there's even more.
Yeah, there's already ready-made maps in there. So if you're looking for something specific and you don't want to go through the process, you could go in, grab one of those ready-made maps, throw that into your game, throw that into your campaign, and you're set to go. So handy tool. Definitely recommend using Dungeon Fog.
Yeah, you can check out their free accounts, the paid account, or the commercial account if you want to use those maps and actual products on maybe the DM's Guild or someplace. With that, let's jump into our video and let's talk about Dungeon Masters, how they make really great players and also not so great players.
All right, Dungeon Masters. Those are the guys and gals, the people, if you will, who sit behind the screen. They dictate the story. They get everyone involved in the game. But I have to say that, there's times that, it's a problem. So we've decided to go ahead and break this down into the 3 best reasons why DMs make the best players and the 3 ways that the DM makes the worst players. So with that, let's jump into the first one. And for the best, that is, they know the rules, perhaps even better than you.
This is super useful. They know how their character works. They know, what the spell they're going to cast does. They tend to be more efficient with their turn. They can be faster. And also, you can lean on them sometimes if you get stuck as the DM and you're not sure about a particular rule or ruling, they could help out.
These are the kind of players that you want to have sit to a novice or a new player at your table. They're good coaches. They're good guides. They know their way through all the rule books. They know the rules. As Dave says, you can be able to point someone towards them, if they need help. Or if you are uncertain of a rule, you can be like, hey, Dave, what's the ruling on how this particular spell works in this scenario? It's a great resource. I've done it numerous times. I game with veteran players all the time. And while I know the rules pretty well, I don't have them all memorized. So I sometimes reach out to the table, and I feel that keeps the game going rather than having to be like, oh, hold on, let me pull out the book.
Reason number 2, they tend to do stuff without prompting. You don't have to wait around for them to do stuff. You don't have to feed them carrots. They just want to jump into the game and play. This is awesome if you like playing sandbox style games. Sometimes you have players that just are basically waiting for the DM to grab them by the hand and pull them through the adventure. But not so much when you have a party full of dungeon masters who are like, "Ooh, I'm in the campaign. I'm playing the game." It's like a kid in a candy store. They want to stick their hands in everything, touch everything, grab everything, maybe sometimes even lick everything. But no, it's just so much easier as a dungeon master when you have players that just want to do stuff in the game, and then you can sit back and react to what they're doing.
When you have players who are used to creating the story, creating the flow of events, these are the kind of players that are going to come into a game with a ready-made backstory. They're going to have goals, and they're going to come into each session potentially with a whole list of ideas of things that they want to do based on the way the last session ended. They might not always get to do them, but when they've got ready-made ideas, ready things that they're going to do, it's incredibly helpful as a DM, especially new DMs, when they're ready to go. They might be engaging of the other players. They might say, "Oh, you know what? The player number 3 over there hasn't really said anything tonight. I'm going to reach out and I'm going to engage them in conversation, perhaps related to the events that have just unfolded, or perhaps something that has happened, 1 or 2 sessions ago, and they haven't had a chance to really talk about it. They're going to sense these things and they're going to get into it, and that makes the game that much smoother, that much more involved, and because of that, that makes DM some of the best players. Reason number 3, they know what you're going through and they respect the dungeon master. You want to get into that, Dave?
Sure. This is super helpful in the sense that they're not going to try and break your campaign. They're going to take the plot threads that you put out there. They're going to engage with the material that you add to the game. So, not only is it great when DMs kind of try and do their own things and add things to the game, but when they do that in a way that enhances the material that you've already created, and they're not really trying to override it or chuck it, but they want to integrate it into the stuff that they wanted to do, or they just see it's there and they get the other players on board and they keep your story moving and keep the story moving, I should say. I mean, it's everyone's story at the table. So it just makes the session go smoother, and you don't feel like your players are being antagonistic towards your story, the story, and the game, which can happen sometimes when you have a DM that understands the hard work and prep you put into it.
They want to incorporate their backstory into what you've already planned. They're going to talk to you, potentially before game, after game, and weave this cooperative story together because they understand how much work it is to do the things that DMs do. There is so much that needs to be put into running a game, and they've been there, they've done that, and because of it, their characters are going to be tied into the world, to the story, that much more deeply.
Next, we're going to jump into the 3 worst ways DMs are players. So first up, they can be a bit of a spotlight hog.
Oh man, I've seen this. I've done this. It's challenging because when you're used to being behind the screen, you're the center of attention. Dave and I both, when we DM, we want to stand up. We want to project. We want to make sure that everybody is there watching us. It's not, about, I need to control the story. I need to do this and that. But to some extent, there's some there. But you're used to being that focal point. You're used to being there. So when you're a player and you're sharing it potentially with, 3, 4, 5 other players, it can be challenging to be like, well, what about me? And I've done it. And there are many times these days I'm resisting. I'm like, oh my God, it's been, 45 minutes since my character's had a chance to do something. This is aggravating. But you have to relinquish, you have to let everybody get their turn, and you have to let everybody have their chance to be in the limelight.
So as the Dungeon Master, you're totally used to being the window that everyone gets to observe your campaign setting through. So as a player, though, you're supposed to be looking through the window with the rest of the players. So sometimes it might be a little bit hard for a Dungeon Master to not get in there and throw some elbows and shoulders and try and push the other players out of the way. Because like Ted said, they are used to being the focal point that everyone has to refer to in order to know what's going on in the story and the campaign and how they're interacting with the world. As a DM who's now playing the game, you have to sit back, kick up your feet a little bit, let the other players have their turn, engage the other players, not just the DM, and just be a good cooperative storyteller with everyone at the table.
And number 2 for the ways the DM is the worst player is they can be argumentative.
So as the Dungeon Master that is now playing in the game, you could very well know the rules better than the person running it, and you may feel the need to exert your dominance of those rules on the current DM instead of going with the ruling that they give. And you're used to being basically the authority at the table, and some people really just have trouble with letting go of that. Some people are kind of control freaks, and maybe that's what appeals to them as being the Dungeon Master. But as the player, you have to operate with the game and within the game differently. You have to let go of some of that control and let the GM do their GMing.
And it's not always about, rules calls on the GM. Sometimes a player might be uncertain and you want to jump in and be like, oh, it's this. And, while you think you might know the rules better than everybody else, sometimes you can be wrong. So if you call out the wrong rule while you're trying to help out another player, that can cause, friction and problems at the table. The player might not be looking for your help. The GM might not want you to step in unless you've been asked to aid another player. If you're a DM and you're a player at that point, just sit back and wait for someone to ask, or just, keep your mouth closed and let the game flow. Everybody will be, more thankful for it.
Yeah, even if there is a conflict at the table and there is a point of contention, as the player, you need to let the GM rule and let it go until after the session. Then if you want to discuss it with people, if they're open to that, that would be a good time to do it. I've done this many times where I have to bite my tongue because I can be a bit of a blowhard at times myself, and I have to recognize this and pull back and be like, no, Ted or Ryan or Mark or whoever is GMing is the GM right now. They're in charge. It's their game to run. And it's completely fine. And we have to let other DMs, tell the story and play the game their way. And if we are so much at odds with it, then this might not be the right table for us. Or as DMs, we may not be really the right people to be players, which I've definitely heard other GMs say that they do not play. They only GM because they are terrible players.
Now, my table, I typically have a lot of veteran players, all of which have spent, countless campaigns that they've run. So there have been many times that a player has called out rules or, argued with what my particular ruling is. And it is for the ease of the game, it's best to just accept what the DM says for that ruling. And if you have an issue, you can bring it up after the session and say, look, I think you ruled poorly here. It caused this issue. Can we revisit this ruling? If it's something that you think is going to be coming up, whether it's the way spells interact with other things, you can definitely do it away from the table to make it easier and not be argumentative and take away from the actual game.
I might not tell them they ruled poorly, though. I might try and find another tactful way of phrasing it.
Well, I was saying...
You suck so bad!
I was saying, if you think it was ruled poorly, you could approach them and say, could we revisit this scenario? I agree with Dave. You should not tell the DM, hey, you suck, or I don't like that. Try to, it's not a good way to start a discussion by insulting the DM. So number 3, for the worst ways that the DM can be a player, is they can be judgmental. And that kind of ties into what, I was just talking about, is you can have that as a DM player. You can be able to say, look, I disagree with that rules call, and therefore you're bringing that into the game. You're bringing that into your discussion.
It's so much more than that, though. It really is the armchair quarterback of D&D, of RPGs, right? Where it's not just like the rules and how things are being done in that nature mechanically, but also how the GM handles different things. I am terrible at this. I do keep my mouth shut because I constantly I would have did it this way in my head. But I try to respect the DM and the other players and not bring those things up unless asked. But yeah, I feel like it's really easy to be sitting there judging the players for their decisions and the DM for the choices that they make. It's okay, if you do this and you keep it to yourself, it's not really a big deal. No harm, no foul. But also, I think for yourself, for your own benefit, it is a lot easier if you learn to let that go as well. And, and that's something I have had to do over the years, and I'm not always great at it. But I do feel like I enjoy the game much more when I do. If we're not running the game, it's not our place to tell other people how to run the game if they have not asked for our advice. And really, it's also not our place to tell other players how to play their characters. So, we have to stow that and wait for people to ask for that advice.
So when you're used to creating stories, you're used to making rules calls, it becomes almost second nature. So when another GM steps up to the plate and you don't like how the story is unfolding, did they prepare too much? Did they prepare too little? How are they interacting with particular players at the table? Unless things are insulting or, the pacing of the game just doesn't seem to be there because of, extenuating circumstances, You have to, as Dave says, let these things go. Enjoy the story. Be your time. I know Dave and I have both had issues in the past where we were, judgmental and disruptive in games. We've told stories in previous videos about how a DM did something and we were just completely dismissive of the story that he was preparing, and we were just bad players for that entire session, so much so that DM never actually DM'd for that table again. We handled it poorly, but we were also much younger, much less experienced than we are now. So as with all things, use all of these as a learning tool. Use them to see where you fall on these spectrums to improve. If you happen to be a DM that also plays, use these as stepping stones to get on the best side of things, not the worst side of things. Correct the problems slowly. If you're doing one of these worst categories, keep your mouth shut. Use it to be building blocks and, build on the best things. Hey, you want another video about DMs behaving badly? Then check out this video, Worst Ways to Dungeon Master Bad DMing and Our GM Pet Peeves.
Let's hang out. Nerdarchy does weekly patron-only live chats.
That's not all. We create 5e content for players and DMs alike every month, do monthly giveaways, and our patrons are automatically entered in, and more.
So until next time,
stay nerdy.
Stay nerdy.